what I love about 100 Thieves is if I'm underperforming to, in a way that they feel as, I'm not getting the wins, they'll fire me. That's great. That's how it should be. I'm going to talk to every player. I'm going to talk to the coaches. The players are going to know what's going on. We're going to treat them with as much respect, professional respect as possible. Most orgs, I would say, don't really know necessarily how much they can get out of a player if they're able to really attack every area of the player development. We're very excited about the next person we're signing onto the coaching staff. It's a familiar face. It's very experienced. So I need to fit in very, very well with our system. It's kind of a cutthroat approach to, or a cutthroat sense of winning, which, winning is often very cutthroat. It's the best that get to succeed. And if you aren't able to achieve that, then that becomes apparent pretty quickly. And if you're not meeting that standard, and so you have to leave.
Welcome, Daniel DDK Kapadia, an ex-professional Quake player, celebrated caster, and now the general manager of 100 Thieves, who just made partnership for Valorant. Dan, anything I missed with that introduction?
No, I think that's fine.
First off, you're the general manager of 100 Thieves, but I don't actually know what that entails in terms of a normal general manager at esports organization. I also don't know if there's anything extra you're doing at 100 Thieves that maybe goes outside like normal general manager duties. So could you kind of go through that?
Yeah, it's an interesting role because in many senses, I think much like a CEO of a company, you start with a mission, and for a general manager in a context of sports, the mission is to win and to make sure that your team is the best at winning. And you might not always have all the requisite pieces that you may need to realize that. And so it's kind of on you to fill in the gaps as they might appear in any system that you currently have, or if there is a system that's not functioning as well as it could be with the pieces you do have, optimizing those systems so that you make the best out of what you have. That's really, I think, in large part, what the general manager does outside of the typical, duties around the more business side of things, which people are familiar with regards to, the typical player trades and making sure that contracts make sense and that you can kind of do those negotiations and so on. Going into this role for me, that area was where I definitely needed the most help, as I don't have a background with the business side of things. And I think one large part as to why I was brought on into this role is because the support is there for that with the infrastructure that 100 Ds has. They're very capable in that way. But what they really wanted is that subject matter expert in, and what they saw, I think, with me is the fact that in terms of competing, I've got a lot of experience doing that, and just I think being in esports for a very long time. So I really understand how everything is supposed to come together, or how everything in theory should come together. Because I think there's not a lot of great examples in terms of the systems that teams operate with, that I think, and that's something I think I looked at and it's like, I think I can do a good job with this. I think I can help to direct the resources correctly to create what we need to set the conditions to be the best team. And this is something that's over, I've come to the conclusion of, based on years of looking just from the outside, and also from the inside a little bit when I've spoken to players here and there, and I hear common complaints about how a team might be run. And that can be something as simple as just the management structure or the communication structure that exists, whereby players feel disenfranchised because then they don't have the input in the relevant places. Or I've seen it countless times that coaches don't have the right power, or there's not the right system that's set up, or structure that's set up, or hierarchy that exists for them to do their job the best. Or I see it, and I've the companies I've worked in, this is a struggle every company would go through, which is, do you have the talented individuals that you hire? It's great, you can get talented individuals, but are they spending most of the time doing the things that they're the best at? So kind of talking about some of these ideas, these are the things that a general manager needs to look at to be able to say, okay, well, this person's spending too much time doing the wrong thing, or there doesn't seem to be a structure to solve this kind of problem. So you really have to have your eye on every part of the system. And here again, for me, what's really cool is that I think, again, this is about competition. It's about winning. It's about producing an environment for the players to succeed. And I think that's something which, for me, I feel like makes a lot of sense in terms of having a role to do that. with all of my experience as a player, and again, the experience, kind of understanding what will help, what makes them tick the best over time, and so now I can kind of put my money where my mouth is a little bit and say, to all those problems I just described, seeing those issues, can I actually, given the power to do so, enact change and maybe lead the way a little bit, which would be the goal, is to say, in a new game like Valorant, you're going to get a lot out of your talent. That's there's no question about that. It's the players on the server that at the end of the day will win you the match or lose you the match. Now, at at a time like this, in a game that's as new as Valorant, it often tends to be the case that the structures and processes don't really exist for a lot of these teams. And over time, people will figure it out, and teams will start to kind of create these standards, these operational standards, which we kind of, okay, now we've got the experience, we know that these are the ways you should do things. These create the best outcomes. But right now, we don't really know what that is. Every team is doing it a little bit differently. So the race right now, and something that is, I think, compelling for someone in my position, is to say, well, I think I can figure that out first. I think I can get the best structures and processes for my team to make them the most successful. And then we can, as a team, have that edge over other teams. Looking 10 years into the future, maybe like where League of Legends has been for the last few years, it becomes about, much more about talent again. Because again, most teams have kind of optimized pretty well for these types of problems that exist within a team. Yeah, I think general manager. There's quite a lot of I guess points I've made there on the more of the vague side, but generally speaking, you are looking after an entire system and trying to build it. So um, it's hard not to be a little bit vague with regards to that, and it's hard not to throw around certain terms which are hard to define or take time to define. I think last time I appeared on the show, I talked about building culture, and culture in of itself is a pretty nebulous term, and a lot of people leave it up for chance. Ultimately speaking, they don't really think about it too much. But another thing that for me is pretty important is trying to solve problems in a systems thinking manner. Because from my perspective, the best way to solve complex problems is by setting the conditions by which that problem will the solution will emerge from that system. So for example, you can't just let's say make a player work hard. Let's say if they're not working harder, you can't sort of put them under the gun and threaten disciplinary action and so on. Like there's some issues with that, right? With the idea of punishment in that context, or with the idea of just saying, I want this outcome, I'm going to go and directly get it. But a way that you could try to make that outcome emerge through the system is by having, through the team culture, which is a collection of values and standards and expectations that you can set. You can set that, we think that working hard is important, and this is kind of what we think working hard looks like. But to encourage that amongst all of the players, that's a kind of a complex thing to do, because you have to create that culture. So you create that expectation, and then in the day to day, you're able to enforce these characteristics to build the character of the players. And over time, if you've done a good job with this, with your day to day, and the kinds of conversations you have, the accountability that maybe you're encouraging between the players, like these kinds of things, there's a lot to this. You can hopefully get to that outcome naturally, where they just develop the kind of work ethic that is compatible with your team, as opposed to trying to force the outcome. And that's something that I'm really cognizant of, because I think it's a natural thing in human psychology as well. If you're trying to make someone do something and they're already not doing it, they're probably not doing it because they don't see the value in it, or because there's another issue there. So there's many ways to attack these problems, but ultimately you want this baseline where foundationally the team has a high operating standards, and that does come largely from how you set up the team culture and what you do in the day to day. Everything matters, and every part of that culture can be quantified into let's say an ideal, and then an action that comes from that ideal as to how you decide to run the team. So again, you say the word culture, but really it's a very complex thing, and you can either leave it up to chance, or you can try to engineer it a little bit just by having good standards across the team and knowing how to communicate them. That's a very long answer. I went through a bunch of different things.
Perfect, perfect. To follow up on culture, because you mentioned it, one, how is the 100 Thieves culture at large, and what do you like about it? And two, one of the things that you've said before is that if you want to change something, if you want to get better at something, you need to specifically and intentionally work at that thing. So I'm curious, when you speak about changing the culture, making it something presumably better, what specific actions or what intentionality are you trying to drive forward, especially in regards to the players? Because I imagine the culture that they create is probably going to be the most important, as much as you or Sean or Mike might have your own thoughts and actions.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think firstly, what's really cool is that, we're coming in and it's a total rebuild. So in terms of the kind of ecosystem of the Valorant team, it's kind of a blank slate, which is fantastic. And we've got a lot of young players. So a lot of players that aren't really burdened by, being under previous systems or structures or cultures that may, lend to some level of baggage or kind of impact that's harder to work with or change over time. It's really a very easy team to work with in that sense. However, there is the culture, the sense of what being on 100 Thieves means, and that is something everyone understands. And it's kind of a cutthroat approach to, or a cutthroat sense of winning, which winning is often very cutthroat. It's the best that get to succeed, and if you aren't able to achieve that, then that becomes apparent pretty quickly, and that if and you're not meeting that standard, and so you have to leave. And that's really, I think the underlying principle of what 100 Thieves is. It's a team that wants to win above all others, and I think that's very important because competition, you have to be 100% in there. You've got to have the fire in your belly. You've got to have that hunger. If there is any question about that for a player, then there's going to be so many other players to replace you, because that's the most fundamental aspect, or one of the most fundamental aspects of being a a top tier competitor, is to have that drive and willingness to be the absolute best, and to have very high standards to achieve that. So with that said, that is an underlying thing there. That's something we're building around. And you mentioned as well that on the other thing that we have to consider is, okay, you've got that, you've got this kind of blank slate situation, but as you rightly said, you are also informed by the human beings you have on the team, and that's super important to understand because all of these things are fluid in some respects. Objectively, there's a lot of things I think that we want to intentionally encourage and foster the growth of when it comes to building the character of the players. Because there are certain things that are important, like punctuality, for example, is important. It signals respect to your teammates, respect for yourself, and what those that you're working with, and it also kind of signals that you're serious about what you're doing. So there's obviously there's certain things that are non-negotiables in terms of what we expect in terms of these operating standards. But we are definitely very attuned, or try to be as closely attuned to the individuals across the entire team, and we want to use the best of all of them to construct essentially the most optimal version of a system for them. And I think that's part of where the work comes in a sense, is that again, if you have these underlying principles, like some of those more objective things you can speak about, those objective standards, cool. That's a framework everyone can agree on. But then when it comes to some of the other elements in terms of where the ownership goes, how much ownership and leadership is possible on your kind of on your team. You can't force people to a certain extent to really truly be something that they just generally aren't. You want to speak to the qualities that exist within them, and ultimately, you're trying to encourage every single player to become a better person, become a better human being, because generally speaking, those kind of virtuous traits generally apply very, very well when it comes to being a high level performer. Honestly, having the integrity, having the respect, having the ownership, the accountability to yourself, to your teammates, the ability to take charge and to really care about what you're doing, and to be consistent. A lot of these things are just generally important things for life, and so we're trying to foster those as much as possible too. And I think with this team, what's really cool is that all the players are just fantastic. I feel like we got pretty lucky in many respects because I expected to have to deal with a lot of different issues going into this. I've been, I've been a player. I tried to be a player whenever I can, and I've been around people in esports for a very, very long time, and just people in the real world. It's not necessarily exclusive to esports that there can be issues with people in terms of, let's say, interpersonal dynamics that might not be working, or let's say players that maybe are a bit disrespectful, or players that maybe have a bit of an unchecked, ego in certain senses. Like maybe players that are not open to help or growth or are resistant in other ways. Like there can be lots of different issues that kind of appear. But so far, what's been wonderful is that this team is really easy to work with. There's no glaring issue with any of the personalities or players on the team. And the thing is that if there were, I do feel that we are well equipped to actually mitigate it and help players to grow through these challenges as best as we can to see if they're going to be compatible with the team. This is another thing too about the way that we approach communication on the team and the way that we approach essentially the hierarchical kind of power structure of the operations. You have the GM at the top, and then you have your coaches, and then you have the players, and there is a clear flow of responsibility and who owns what task and who owns what on the team in terms of those operations. And we always, though, despite that, it doesn't matter if, let's say, I'm making the final call on a roster decision, for example. I'm going to talk to every player. I'm going to talk to the coaches. The players are going to know what's going on. We're going to treat them with as much respect, professional respect as possible, because that, again, you have to, with a lot of things, obviously, lead with how you want. If you want to, encourage those behaviors in them, you have to lead with those behaviors yourself. And so we make sure to have input from the players on pretty much everything, even if they know that they don't make the call. They can at least understand that they have some ownership in the decisions that are made on the team, that they are visible and seen and they're valued in the ways that they should be. So we really try to make sure that that's maintained, because that's a really critical thing. And you can see, I think, in the way that a lot of the teams operate, that players are not treated with the respect that they deserve. The players are the most important pieces of any team. They may be the most transient pieces in many cases. They may come and go much more quickly, but ultimately they're incredibly important. And we're also dealing with youngsters, people that don't necessarily have professional experience, people that don't have they don't understand what the standards should be. You don't know where you're getting the players from either. They can come from all kinds of different backgrounds and walks of life. So in their competitive environment, being someone myself who used esports really to kind of fortify myself as a human being, despite having more difficult circumstances elsewhere, having a place to be able to garner that self-esteem and have a place to grow as a human being is incredibly essential. And so that's a huge emphasis, I think, for us. I can't really overstate it, or understate it, one of the two. So I hope that answered your question. I tend to just really ramble a lot, so it's hard to know sometimes.
No, no, this is great. Going back over like a lot of your interviews and a lot of the stuff you've talked about previously with players, it's a lot of one-on-one stuff. It's not a lot of like system stuff. It always seems very personal. So I was curious, was there a specific incident or event that happened that made you want to take this kind of broader strokes approach to esports, being a general manager where you're dealing with systems rather than as much directly with people?
It's interesting because I think really to create an ecosystem, you need to understand the inputs as well as the outputs, and the input is really the human beings. So I think it necessitates having a closer understanding as to how to work with people, or what exactly their experience is, and to be able to see them, because through doing that, you're able to put them in the right place, right, in the system. So for me, I think what was really interesting here is just seeing all of these inefficiencies in terms of really the limitation being the systems, because there's so many great talent out there. There's so many amazing coaches and analysts and all these kinds of individuals, but just where should the focus be? What should they be? How should they be working most optimally together? This is typically where I would see the failures. So for me, this role made sense because I've also seen it be the case that talent would struggle because they just don't have the right attention. There's just not the eye on the issue on the right issue. The upper management might make a decision purely based on a result without really understanding the the timelines that would make sense to really know how good is that team. Just because they got that one particular result, what if that team wins the championship in 2 months? Like, can you really? How do you know that or not? You have to really have the most granular understanding to be able to make those projections. And that's a lot of what this job is about too. It's about understanding how to keep yourself on track to the wins. The sense that what is the with a team at any point, what is the realized gain versus the unrealized gain of that team, and what is the time horizon to like what methods can you employ to actually you know like see the unrealized gains that you're looking for. Because if you say, well, this player has loads of potential, well, that's cool. That means you see that there's a lot of growth and that growth could mean results. But what is the methodology to get there, to realize that unrealized potential, and then and how long is that going to take, right? And so that's the part of it that's really interesting to me, because I've seen lots of players that are phenomenal talents, and they just, again, like we mentioned before, they're just not in a system that's going to help them. They're not around people that's going to help them. There's not the person that can see the problem or be able to have the resources to apply to help them to solve that problem. Whether it's, and I would say most commonly it is with top level players, it's going to be more mental game. And there's a really, it's very, to me, very obvious as to why that's the case. Most players are very, very good mechanically. Most players are very good in their decision making. But the difference comes, the place that they themselves don't spend much time is the mental game. And the mental game becomes a part of the picture whenever you apply pressure, because pressure is something that is essentially unique for a professional player to the scenario of actually playing the match. Because in the match you're putting yourself on the line. This is your statement every time as to who you are in your career. And that translates directly to your sense of value, because you invest all of your time being this thing. No one wants to be a shit version of that thing. So there's a lot on the line personally in that sense as to your sense of self. And then there's a lot on the line in terms of, your career and kind of maybe how other people, might judge you, and what are all the weights on people's shoulders. It can be so many different things, but there's a lot. And the interesting thing about this is that that's all perception. That's all a mental perception. It's not something like, no one's coming up to you and there's no physical, tangible thing you can touch that is that pressure. No, that's it all exists in the mind. And so that's a very complex environment, and it requires a lot of awareness to really start to tap into what's going on in your own minds and to start to take control of that. And most players are spending all of their time getting good at the mechanics, getting good at the decision making. They have to spend unbelievable amounts of hours to kind of essentially code their intuition, so they can just like at the snap of a finger know what the correct decision is. There's no time to actually think. So that requires enormous amounts of repetition. So in that sense, I'm just making the point that most orgs, I would say, don't really know necessarily how much they can get out of a player if they're able to really attack every area of the player development. And also, does the circuit allow for it? Does the resources of the team allow for it? In a lot of cases, it's not the case that there is not the resources to do this. Players that get into slump territory, that's like the worst place ever to be. And it's difficult. It's difficult to do that by yourself. Extremely difficult. I think you need help most of the time when you get to that spot. It can get really ingrained, and it can become a problem that just continues to persist. And now you've just lost that player for months. That's horrendous. That's a terrible situation. You never want to be in that spot, but that can happen. So and there's a lot of other areas too in terms of the performance that are important that I think are overlooked. And I think you need a more holistic understanding of what are all the different kind of like pillars or areas of performance to understand what's really important. Because for example, someone that's, let's say, maybe is an expert in the mental game, they may not be considering a lot of other elements. Everything is a nail to someone holding a hammer. Is that how the saying goes? Something like that, right? So you want really to have and I think that's like why I feel like a bit more um, like this is a bit more of a natural fit, this kind of a role for me, because I'm essentially kind of having to look at all of these different areas and kind of assess, well, what is the attention that's needed, and so on. With that said, in the last 6 months with the team, it's been very difficult in the sense that we've just been in an unending, season, more or less, which has made things very challenging because I've recognized that the amount of work that's necessary for the coaches is pretty crazy. I actually think that you need to run a team and do everything um, effectively to, like, hit every single area. So you've got running the scrims, running the day to day, the player development, the individual time you might want to spend on the players, the research for your playbook or the playbook generation in general. That's incredibly time consuming. Preparing against opponents, doing match specific research. There is a lot of stuff, a lot of different areas, and when you look at what the coaches have to do in the day to day, there really isn't the time to do a lot of this stuff. And there's a lot of stuff I didn't mention too. So with all of that said, you have a situation where if you don't have enough manpower that you can apply to these problems, it becomes a game of prioritization over let's say optimization, because you can't optimally do everything. You have to just prioritize what is more important. You're not in an optimal state unless you have enough capacity to be able to apply the amount of kind of work uh, to all of the problems. So that's something that I've noticed, and with that also makes it more difficult to change and alter systems and kind of review them, because we were constantly in game time. Build the playbook, change the playbook, build the playbook, change the playbook, and there's just constant, it's just constant. So I felt like we didn't have a great opportunity without a true off season to do a lot of the things that I think would be helpful for us to make a difference in terms of how we run things. And I think that now going into this off season, we actually have the ability to do that, and we are going to be doing that. So I can say with confidence. So that's exciting for me, because a lot of the stuff that I've said, I feel like we still haven't gotten there yet. Like I have a lot of these ideas, and when you're looking at a system, you can't just put one tiny piece in at a time. That doesn't really work that way. You have to conceptualize the entire thing, and then you have to then understand how to build the entire thing. It's like a foundation of a house. You can't say, "Oh, okay, I'm going to put this like this corner, like this 200 square feet of the foundation in. I'm not going to put any of the rest of the foundation of the house in. I'm just going to build this part of the house." It's like, no, that's not how that works. You have to build the entire foundation first, and then that foundation will then inform what is possible for you to build on top of it. And that's what I feel like we now have the chance to do. Make sure to subscribe to Valoranting, because they ask some pretty good questions, so you don't want to miss out on the answers.
Awesome. So it sounds like, from your point of view, all of being a player, being a caster, doing some coaching, those one-on-one conversations, the next logical step is to be a GM, because you've done a lot of personal work. You understand, as you said, those inputs, and now you're in a position to create a system that leverages those inputs into the best possible outputs, aka competition.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's interesting, because I do feel like if I wanted to really apply myself on any one of the areas, I feel like I could do it. I might not be the best in any one of the areas, but I feel like I have enough of the understanding, or enough of a granular, or an ability to have enough of the prerequisite knowledge and the ability to analyze for more. That's necessary to be able to make a judgment as to what's effective in terms of what we're doing, and where we're kind of missing out on value. Because I think that's when you look at things in general, you should be able to quantify them in some respect within some system, and you should be able to find a way to measure things, because you can spend all this time looking at these things and looking at the stats pages and stuff like that, and it's not really granular enough. You have to kind of create your own system, and you have to find your own way to quantify it. And so when I was talking about the culture thing, like understanding what the values are, and then how you then execute into how does that execute into the day to day, that's a way of saying, well, I'm quantifying culture to try to create these outcomes. And if you can do that, and then you can have that system in place, and you can apply it consistently, you can then start to understand what levers and dials you may need to tweak to kind of better your understanding of that system, and to better the outcomes that you're getting, or to solve the problems. But if you don't have an ability to have enough of a holistic understanding of these various disciplines, which I feel like, again, as you mentioned, over time, through my personal experiences, I've gone deep enough as an analyst, as a content creator, as a player who struggled with every aspect of every pillar of the performance. I've worked with my own, mental game coaches, various ones. I've done all the reading in that department, or as much has been effective for me to do. And similarly, I've spent time working at AIM Lab, where I was getting really into the questions as to how do you quantify and look at look at this from a first principles perspective, just the mechanics element, and then how do you optimize for that? What is possible for someone to do? Just like going through these processes, I feel like has allowed me to similarly have the opportunity now to like do the same thing here. Okay, well, what are the first principles to build from that foundation we talked about to kind of create a system on top of that that allows us to get to a successful outcome with the team, whereby each and every player are in positions to succeed. None of them are stalling out in terms of any of their personal development. We're able to quickly understand what a solution might be. We can spot where the problem might be as it arises. We can keep tweaking and keep iterating. We can see how far we want to go. I can give, let's say, for example, Will as an example, as a player who developed amazingly well in our system and with the support that we gave him. And I don't want to take a single thing away from him either. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Will is the type of player that's very open minded and extraordinarily hardworking. And his I think the magical element for him, I think, as far as I understand, from what I saw, was how emotionally intelligent he is. And most people might think about the emotional intelligence as something that's an important dynamic to get along with your teammates. And whilst that is true, it's just very socially very important. It's also that's more of an external aspect to a degree. The internal aspect of that, why that's so important, is because the mental game is all about emotions, and that's where he made his biggest gains as a player. And so, from that sense, this is a player that has a great growth trajectory, but when we were looking at our team and having to make a decision, and I was looking at how well the team gets along, how he is was a critical part of the social structure of the team. It's like, because of just how he fit. He was in the friend group with Bang and with Asuna, inherently, and just gets along with everybody. Is able to be just a very warm presence all the time. He's very socially like important to the team. And on top of that, he had the best performance at champs. This is like a hard decision, I think, for us to say, well, we're going to move on from having him on the roster. And because you're again looking at this question I mentioned before of, okay, well, what's the situation? How deep can we look at this in terms of analysis? And we've created systems for player assessment and evaluation, so that every single time we get into an off season, we're looking at it from again the most granular perspective that we can, and because we're creating our own systems, we're able to see that consistency over time, which gives us more knowledge as to how good our guesses actually are with regards to some of these things. Because the statistics aren't out there yet, the tools aren't out there yet. The API is limited to really even begin that process. We're years out probably as to something that's really amazing in terms of the using the raw numbers to assess players. So we have to create our own rubric and understand how we can evaluate players and kind of and use that process to weigh against the needs of the team and the timelines of the team. So what are the needs, and by when do we need those things? And so looking at Will, I felt confident that Will could be the kind of player that we needed him to be. But the issue was that it was going to take, I think, too much time. And given the level of contentiousness on for his position in particular, it wouldn't have been the correct decision for the team to move forward with him on the roster when we had the available options of Cryo and Ye. Essentially, we get to have first pick there, and so, and those players bring to the table immediately the things that would take Will a long time to kind of develop for what we needed. An incredible player in many respects, and I think he's going to have a fantastic career from what I have seen. But those guys fit the bill. Like Cryo Ye would have fit the bill in the timeline that we're looking at for that position. So, I think with roster decisions, just talking about some of the ways you want to look at this, this ties back into 100 Thieves as a team in general, because they believe in this process. They believe in getting the talent, getting the people that can look at the problems as granularly as possible and to make the best decisions and to have consistency in that, not just leave it all up to intuition and guesswork, but also to understand how can I measure this and do it in a way which is better than what anyone else is doing to give us the edge. It's kind of, similar to Moneyball in a sense, where if you have an expert that's able to really see the game and really understand what's going on, and they can make a system around that, you're onto a, almost a, from a dollar perspective, you're outperforming all of the other teams now, because you have systems that allow you to see value where they don't see it. Maybe they're overvaluing a player because they don't know how to correctly assess the player. How can they do that if they don't have a sense as to how to assess their own team and how to play? How can you place value on players if you can't assess your own team? Why is your team good? And that's like actually, going back into the individual aspect with any player, any pro player, if they have like developmental hurdles that they're facing, one of the most important questions to answer is, how do you define your performance? How do you quantify your performance? And this is something that I think Jared Tenler, for me, one of the things that really struck me with his approaches with the mental game is that he understands, and this is why I think he's so awesome, is because he's treading into territory. He doesn't understand, as a mental game coach who's spent, his I think his passion as far as sports is concerned is playing golf. But he works with, professional golfers and poker players and day traders and esports athletes and all sorts. He doesn't need to know the subject matter of the game necessarily, but he understands how important it is to define your performance. So even though he can't define what makes a good player in Valorant, he understands how to help a player through that process, because that process is intrinsically linked to the mental and emotional aspects, to the game as well. So because there can be triggers all over the place, and that's a really important part of the process. So that's one thing that I would do if I was coaching any player, is I would always start by helping them to lay that foundational kind of groundwork of, how do you define your performance? And that's why, I could go into it. But, I don't know if that's the purpose of this. I'm aware that I've been talking for a very long time. You asked me like two questions. And this is like 50 minutes. So, but yeah, I think being able to define things, see the value, is ultimately the most important thing. And you can't see the value correctly if Okay, let me give you like this. This is an epistemological thing as well, right? So for those that don't know, that just means it's like the theory of knowledge, like what is knowledge in philosophy. And you can look at it this way. When you look at like a piece of information, that piece of information can make sense to you, but but that can change based on the context of where that piece of information fits in the whole picture, right? And what is the whole picture? For example, like you could say that, um, or I guess a good analogy I like to use is like, if you have this massive jigsaw puzzle, right, and you don't know what the pictures are, but you can see what the shapes are, so you can kind of fit the shapes together, but it's very hard to understand where the shapes actually fit in the grand scheme of things. Like, what is the position supposed to be of these four, pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that you've connected? The four pieces you've connected make sense. It feels like it works because it does. It fits together, but it's not like this closed loop. It's a part of an entire system, and so it's one important piece. So unless you understand how to look at everything and how everything fits together, and if you don't understand that, you don't know where to position that thing. If you don't know where to position that thing, you don't know how important it is. But it's very easy to say, well, this fits together, therefore it makes sense. And so that can be a trap that you can fall into. So again, I think this really relates back to this sense as to why it's important to have someone in a management position who understands, essentially, what the whole system, like, all of the pieces of the system. And I don't want to be so arrogant as to say I understand all of it. I'm always open to the fact that there's lots that I haven't figured out yet, but I've spent a long time trying to do that, trying to figure out all of the pieces of the system. So hopefully I can prove that, put my money where my mouth is. And what I love about 100 Thieves is, if I'm underperforming to, in a way that they feel is, I'm not getting the wins, they'll fire me. That's great. That's how it should be. There should be accountability, and there's not enough accountability these days. So that's like a weird thing to say, but uh, but to me that's important.
To kind of segue into champions, when you got to champions, how did your day to day change? Because obviously, you know, excluding LCQ&A, it sounds like you have this very broad view of like creating systems, trying to look at, you know, longer amounts of time. But champions, all that focus has to narrow into something, you know, that might last a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks at the most.
Yeah, going into champions and in general, I think trying to do all of the things I would have liked to do to help, I think, help the players to be in a great place to perform at champions. Again, there wasn't really the time to kind of do that in the ways I would have liked. I think there's a lot in terms of mental resilience at these events that is really important, and a lot of experience that you kind of can't really get without doing the thing. So I always knew that there was going to be a lot of holes in term, and that we could very well, as I have experienced on more than one occasion, maybe twice, that at these first international events, you can just fall on your face and not find a way to pick yourself up again. And as you know, we tried to do what we could to use our experience to maybe help the players, but at the same time, we understand that that's how it is, and that the players have to experience that, they have to feel that, and you just have to kind of support them through it in the best way that you can. And so going into champions, we had it was quite the gauntlet because coming from LCQ, after challenges, we had that kind of month to fix all of the issues. Things really came together in LCQ, and then we had this situation where there's a new map now, and we've got to figure that out. And so everything was a rush. It was so much of a focus around what Sean and Mike were able to accomplish in just preparing the players from a strategic standpoint and helping them to get the reps. But then when we get to champions, and immediately Derek gets COVID, and then the entire team shortly thereafter gets COVID. Suddenly we've lost, I think, at least 5 days. I think we lost a full practice. And the most important part of the scrims at Champions was to allow our team to start to get comfort against calling styles or comps that they hadn't played against before, players that they had no familiarity with at all. That's a lot. It's a lot to deal with for four of our players. It was the first international journey as well. So there's all the challenges here. And so again, we work with Jared Tendler to try to help fortify the players, and when they're dealing with these things, how should you be thinking about these things? I was really trying to encourage the players where possible to kind of open up about how they felt about stuff, because it's really easy as a player to, especially if you're a younger player, to say, oh, it's I can deal with this. It's fine. I've got this. This isn't important. Like this maybe is a feeling that you have that this is hard, or a feeling that you're unsure about something, or that you're nervous about something, or that this PC doesn't feel right. It's or I haven't played on a stage before. What is that going to be like? It's really easy just to say I'll be fine. And that's okay. In many respects and senses, to just be like, oh, I'll be fine, I'll go do it. But when we're in this kind of environment which is heavily competitive, it's you don't you don't have the opportunity for that to create a problem. So you actually need to really explore what the issue is there. You want to talk about it, and you want to kind of go through it with the team and get everyone on the same page. Because what can happen is, if you have issues there that aren't spoken, players can now start handling them by themselves. And what you want them to do is to handle these issues with their teammates, so that everybody is that's an opportunity for greater bonding and resiliency as a team, and it also provides a lot of relief. And if there is some kind of an issue there, let's say like it is the PCs thing, I'm not used to playing on this PC, it's way worse than the one I normally am used to playing on. You can address that with that person, and then help them to like kind of feel it in a way that makes sense, as opposed to them just thinking it's fine when it's really bothering them, and they're not willing to admit it. So it's kind of hard to kind of go through some of those things with younger players, I feel like, because it's a that's part of that becomes easier as you mature as a person, I think, to kind of give more grounds to some of these internal thoughts and feelings. um
I
at least
also
I know for me. Oh, go ahead.
I remember during the video that 100 Thieves put out that kind of chronicled you guys going through champions. There was, I think it was after the loss to DRX. I forget which player it was, but you were asking them about like, hey, like what's going on, and it seemed like they were trying to give you that information, but it kind of came out vague. I think they said the vibes were off, which is good information, but that seems like a one of those things that a younger player has problems with, being able to really identify like, okay, what does that mean? What are things that could be solved to put the vibes on, so to say. So is that something that you've tried to coach the players on, and understanding that type of stuff so that they can communicate those types of things?
I think this is some. I think I love. By the way, I love that you've brought this up because that is exactly the kind of like. There's a lot of value there. There's a if someone's saying, "Oh, the vibe wasn't there," and by that notion, they're saying when the vibe is there, we win. It's like, hang on, that's a really important thing to figure out. so, so I completely, yeah, this is an important thing to help to decode with the players, and it is something that is more challenging, and it's something that will be a huge emphasis moving forward. Again, it's one of those things where we didn't really get enough time to address these things with how everything came together, the lack of time, just being constantly in season. We didn't have a the greatest, let's say, like I would have loved, for example, all of the players to have spent more time with Jared. We didn't get him as involved until the build up to LCQ, and it was still fairly minimal. So but that's the kind of thing that's a mental game coach, or the person that's doing some form of the psychological kind of support for the team should be helping the team with, because as you say, like to decode those things is really important, because if by doing so you're then able to instead of using it as a cop out, because it's like saying, oh, we had an off day. Well, okay, why? What is an off day? Because you're not allowed to have those. Like you're not allowed to have those on an important match day. I've heard lots of teams say that, oh, it's just an off day, but you need to be able to like really. That's like a really huge thing that you could possibly that you could use to possibly learn from. That you should, and because if you can fix that and not have off days anymore, or fix that and not have a bad vibe anymore, or ensure that the vibe can be created, now you're onto something. This is the same kind of thing again with what Jared's approach encourages. It's this sense of if you understand every part of what your performance is, you're then able to replicate it because you understand what conditions you need to create to do that. And if you don't understand at all what conditions you need to create, you might you're leaving it to just variance, to just random chance. And if you don't have to do that, you shouldn't. We need performances on match days. That's a non-negotiable. So we have to figure out how to do that. So yeah, I love that you brought that up. That is something that will be a pretty imperative for us, especially as we integrate, Jared more and more with the team. That's something that we intend to do. I think typically the mental game stuff tends to be something that you'll use an individual to help, each player with their particular problems. But Jared is so experienced that we have a lot of trust, and the stuff that he's done with the team as a whole has been really effective. And we look to use him more to inform us as coaches, because he will have a certain understanding with the players as to kind of like lead us, help to guide us in the right direction on some of our choices as well, as to what will be best to help them out, and so on. So that relationship is really important. For me, the relationship with all of the support staff is really supposed to be as intimate as possible, like as involved, as integrated as possible, because they should all feel the ownership and their impact on the team. And and I think that's just motivating for everyone, and it gives everyone a greater buy-in. So we look to, if we add pieces to the team, it's not ever done lightly. It's done with the intention for them to be integrated into the team. And so far, I think we've been really fortunate that everyone we've worked with has been really fantastic. Outside of Jared, we have a dietitian as well that we've been working with, who's a performance dietitian. So it's not just here's how you eat good for health. It's let's optimize. Yes, we want to eat well and be healthy, but we're optimizing that for performance and for match days, and we're using any of the his niches is understanding, okay, what are all the studies that actually quantify are quantifiably benefiting performance in an athletic or cognitive capacity. And I've had a lot of interesting conversations with him about that, because I've always had a little bit of a, because we're talking about defining things. You'll see it be the case that it'll say, oh, exercise, benefits, has a cognitive benefit. But what does that mean? Like, cognitive is a very broad term ultimately in terms of the brain. So um, anyway, going off on another tangent, but moving forward into champions, we encountered a lot of like extreme difficulties, and there was a lot of, I tried to fight with Riot on a lot of things. There were lots of things that happened that I didn't approve of. In terms of, I think the biggest one really was that they had it be mandatory that the players had to get sent to the stage if you have at least 3 players that got negative tests, COVID tests. So we had this situation where with the DRX game, which was a very close match, where we had 3 players sent to stage who couldn't communicate with our 2 coaches who had COVID still, our in-game leader who was in an isolation room with COVID as well, and Asuna was also the other one that was stuck in one of the isolation rooms. And there was a really it was poorly handled in terms of Riot's communication and with us, because they ended up, and also how they managed the situation in general, because they ended up pulling Stella to the isolation room, um, without, like, they couldn't give us a window as to when it was going to happen, basically. And they ended up pulling him before he could eat food, and he ended up arriving, I think, like an hour and a half, over an hour and a half before the match started, and they take his phone away immediately. So he just sat in the room, having missed the food that had just arrived to his room, and it was hard to avoid that because we didn't know when they were going to call him. Essentially, they couldn't give us that information. They just turn up and they escort him up there, take his phone, and then you've got Sean, Mike, and Stella and Asuna sitting in these isolation rooms for like an hour and a half before the match, staring at a wall because they can't talk to anyone, they can't look at their phones because they've been taken away. We've got our players in the venue who are going on stage for the first time, and then we've got this situation where the other team has everybody on in the venue. Um, so that felt really terrible, and it was like a 9 p.m. game as well. So that felt really terrible for the whole team, and I was really pulling to just say, can we just keep the team together in the hotel, because this is going to be so disruptive to everything, and we're going to have all of these issues. But that was their policy around that, and Riot wants to really stick to these policies that they set. For me, I would love that to be reviewed for the future. But regardless, if you're talking about a bunch of players who are extremely inexperienced, I have nothing but I'm extremely proud of how well they held it together, because there was not a single complaint. um, they didn't complain. I honestly can't believe it. They didn't really complain about this stuff. I was like trying to fight the war, and sort of shield them from it as much as I could, and keep up the right attitude when I was with them. But I was furious with a lot of these things that were happening, because I felt like it was so unfair, and it gave us a competitive disadvantage that could have been avoided, and so on. So in terms of, like, talking about some of the dynamics with the GM and the team, that's part of what I'm there to do, is to insulate the team from a lot of these things and try to aggressively solve these problems in the best way, to represent my team's interest in winning, ultimately, as well as obviously preserving the relationship as best as possible with Riot, even if they're doing things that I really don't agree with, maintaining those professional standards, and trying to focus on just getting the best outcome. So that became, very challenging because of the COVID situation, and trying to take care of all of the players as well. That became my job. Taking care of all of the players. We had some support staff as well on the scene who were also helping out with that, and our handlers were doing a good job too. But ultimately, it was really rough. It was very difficult, but that's how it goes if you're a player. The circumstances are going to be shitty, and at the end of the day, you win or lose, and that's all anyone ever cares about. That's how it is supposed to be. So that's something I understand, and something that I have in my mind when trying to make sure that our players are ready for winning, because you never know. You never know what can happen.
So we've talked about a lot of stuff, and the mental preparation and mental resiliency has been something that you've brought up over and over, presumably because it's something that you think takes priority over a lot of the other things that you could be getting into the system. But like you said, you were very much on a time crunch. So, looking ahead to Sao Paulo, I'm wondering if you can tease something else that you'll be adding into the system so that 100 Thieves can perform their best at that tournament.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm smiling because we have this opportunity to do a lot with this off season, and so we really isolated certain areas in terms of where more focus should go with some of the individuals on the team in terms of developing them. So one position I think that's always going to be key for any team worth their salt is to continually help their in-game leader to get better, because the in-game leader is can often also be the team, or I think it can often be beneficial. It can be also kind of the team captain as well, in the sense that you help them to develop the leadership skills if they aren't already naturally inclined. You kind of work with them to be almost more of a bridge between the coaching and the team as well, because you want them to be able to really understand how the coaches think. You want there to be a very good relationship there. And, Stella's been fantastic in terms of that with how things have gone over the last 6 months. And so, trying to optimize those processes around how integrated he is with the coaching staff is something we're looking at, exploring to optimize greatly and to help him get better as an in-game leader, and to make sure that, because one thing, for example, is that you never want to rely on just one piece for at a tournament. Let's say if you have a breakdown, you want to make sure that everybody can bring it up if necessary, that everyone can step up to kind of rescue the team when they're emotionally in a terrible situation or things are going poorly in another regard. But in the in-game leader is kind of a special position because if they're calling, you don't want them to just be a playbook receptacle that the coach is just feeding them all in the entire playbook. You want to have a really involved process there, and so that's something that's we're looking at, uh, really refining going into the off season. There's some other stuff too around some of the players in particular that I won't go into. Other than that, talking about the mental game, integrating more stuff around that, more involvement from our mental game coach, and helping the players to understand more as to how they should explore that themselves is going to definitely be something that's on the agenda as far as I'm concerned. There are some changes coming in the support staff. So we're having a change in the coaching structure. Sean Gares is leaving; he's going back to content creation, and we have Mike stepping into the head coach role. We're very excited about the next person we're signing onto the coaching staff, and it's a familiar face. It's very experienced, and he's going to fit in very very well with our system, and he's going to allow us to kind of continue to develop all of this and give Mike the assistance that he needs. And we're really excited about the direction we'll be able to take things moving into Sao Paulo, given the fact that we have a roster now that also allows us to be a bit more flexible in terms of how we look to, let's say, prepare for tournaments. One of the issues in Valorant with tournament preparation is the whole anti-stranding thing, and so we're definitely going to fortify ourselves against that, and that's going to be a focus for us, I think, as well. I think it's something that every Valorant team is should be thinking about, because when you're in a tournament, it's very hard to change things. So you need to have a good solution for that problem. So for once teams have that data on you at the tournament, how do you, with no time, make sure that you can keep winning, even though teams might know what to expect. So that's something we're thinking about that ahead of time. We're thinking about making sure that we improve our resiliency for land. That we make sure that the processes around that uh, make a lot more sense, because we had such a rush over the last year. We didn't really have the time to do that. We are looking to integrate more player development um, things internally. We're building some systems for that. That's going to, I think, be really, really helpful. We're also, making sure that we're going to be able to give the right attention to the day to day. We're going to be likely changing our day to day a lot to optimize in a lot of ways, which I'm feeling like a lot of teams won't do. I think it's going to be special for us, so I'm excited about that as well. And yeah, I'm just honestly, I think the team is just gonna go from strength to strength, despite us losing, Sean, which is devastating in a lot of ways. He's a genius for the game in terms of his ability to understand how to look at the game strategically. There's very few that could rival that. He's very gifted in that regard. So that's a pretty big loss, and he's someone that the players have really looked up to and have enjoyed, tremendously, working with. So, it's sad, very sad from that perspective, and it leaves a little bit of a hole, but it's not one that we feel like we aren't able to fill, and it's not one that we aren't able to kind of, I think, keep again like going from strength to strength from. So ultimately, we're excited and happy for the changes that he's making for himself, and hopefully it's not the last of him in a coaching position, because I think that he has a lot to offer with that. So, but with that said, having Mike stepping into the position too of head coach, it's an interesting one. I think for many people they would have questions around it, given maybe the fact that he's a younger presence, but he's if you know him, he's wise beyond his years, to say it lightly, and we're going to have an immense amount of support around him too. So we think that going into Sao Paulo will be way more prepared, generally more resilient for LAN, but also I think what we'll be able to show strategically and the talent that we've brought to the table with Cryo is going to allow us to just become a different team entirely. So very much looking forward to that. I can give you the concise version. Moving into Sao Paulo, we're looking to absolutely ensure that our ability to play and deal better with LAN is there. There's a few things we're going to be putting in place to that effect. We are going to have a coaching structure change and coaching staff change as well. So it's something that we have to work with, but we're really excited about. Ultimately, we have a lot of changes coming into how we're going to run the day to day. So I'm very excited about that, because that is going to ultimately benefit the players. Changing the day to day in terms of the practice, how that is run, and what we're doing is that they are going to get the results from that. So before we were more limited, we were much more. We indexed heavily on getting the reps, getting the strategy, getting the playbooks kind of in place, getting the theory in place. But now we're going to have a lot more flexibility to do a lot more things with it. So I'm excited for that potential. We're going to focus more on player development as well. So we spotted a lot of stuff over the last 6 months with the players, and as they got comfortable with us and we got trust with them, there's going to be a lot that we can do to work with them to help them to improve. And then finally moving into Sao Paulo, you've got to understand how to perform at a LAN like that. And I think we're looking to be a lot more flexible than we have been in the past. So I'm also looking forward to that too.
Awesome. Super awesome. Any quick shout outs?
I want to give a shout out to 100 Thieves and all of the fans, the org first, just because 100 Thieves is a pretty special org in the sense that they put winning above everything else. And they, coming into this position, I had a particular vision for what this role should be, and they agreed. And I think having the trust from them is means a lot, and so I want to thank them for that, and I hope that I can continue to satisfy their expectations, and I want to thank the fans as well to for all of the support that's come to us with this completely new roster build. 6 months ago, we kind of came in with some big words, promising this vision, the Astralis of Valorant, and saying, explaining all of our decision making, and that's one thing, but actually getting it done is another. And I feel like we closed out the year in a way which you guys were happy about, and so that was a pleasure for us to be able to do that for you. But you guys made it a pleasure as well, because there was a lot of support when things weren't going so well, despite it being a completely new look. So, definitely feel indebted for that. So, thank you to all of the fans and the support. And I am super excited for what we're going to be bringing to you guys in 2023. So, I hope you're excited as well, and keep the support coming.
Thank you so much, Dan. From Hoodie Organization to LCQNA winners to champions, a team that is empowered by a powerful structure that's now finally going to get the time and care to hopefully surprise everyone at Sao Paulo. It was wonderful having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.